The judge looked at me over the top of his glasses and asked if I was ready to proceed. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. I was 63 years old, sitting at a table in a Maricopa County courtroom, and my daughter was walking through the door carrying a small black recorder no bigger than a deck of cards. She was 22. She'd driven 4 hours from Tucson the night before and slept on my couch. When I made her eggs that morning, she barely ate. She just kept turning that recorder over in her hands, setting it down, picking it up again. I didn't know what was on it, not all of it. She'd told me enough to know I needed to stay in my seat when they played it. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what I thought my life was. I grew up outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. My father worked a railroad. My mother cleaned houses on the north side of town. We didn't have much, but we had a clear idea of what a man was supposed to do. You worked. You provided. You showed up. That was the whole curriculum, and I took it seriously. I met my wife at a church picnic in 1987. She was standing near the dessert table in a yellow dress, and she laughed at something her friend said, and I thought, that's it. That's the woman I'm going to marry. I was 26. She was 24. Her name was Connie. We got married 8 months later at a small ceremony in Scottsdale. Her parents came out from Ohio. My father shook my hand afterward and said, "Take care of her." I took that seriously too. For the first few years, things were genuinely good. I was working in commercial HVAC. Not glamorous, not well-paying at first, but steady. Connie had a part-time job at a dental office. We rented a small house in Mesa, drove old cars, cooked at home most nights. We were building something. That felt good. That felt right. Our daughter came along in 2002. We named her April. She was early by 3 weeks and spent 6 days in the NICU, and I don't think I slept more than 2 hours at a stretch that whole time. When they finally let us bring her home, Connie cried the whole drive. Happy tears, she said. I believed her. Somewhere around 2005, things started to shift. My company had grown. I was managing 3 crews by then, and the following year I was offered a partnership stake. It meant more hours, a lot more. I was leaving the house at 5:30 most mornings and sometimes not getting back until 8 or 9 at night. Saturdays too sometimes. The money was getting real though. We bought a proper house in Gilbert. Good school district, 4 bedrooms, pool in the back. Connie wanted to stop working. I said, of course. She was raising April, managing the house. That was a job. I never questioned it. What I didn't see, what I genuinely did not see, was that something had gone quiet between us. Not loud quiet, not dramatic. Just the slow kind of quiet that fills a house so gradually you stop noticing it. We'd eat dinner with April between us and talk about her day and her school and her teachers, and that would be the conversation. Connie would go to bed around 10. I'd stay up reviewing contracts or paperwork. I thought we were just in a rhythm. I thought that was normal. I thought that was what long marriages looked like. I was wrong about a lot of things. By 28, and April was 16 and fiercely independent in the way that teenage daughters are, all edges and opinions and capable of more love than she would ever admit. She and I had always been close, in a quiet way. She'd ride along with me sometimes on weekend mornings when I had to check on a job site, and we'd stop for breakfast tacos at this place off the 202, and she'd tell me about her friends and her books and whatever she was thinking about. I loved those mornings. Connie and April had a harder relationship. Not terrible, not anything you'd point to and name, just a distance that had developed somewhere around middle school that nobody talked about directly. I figured it was normal mother-daughter friction. I told myself it would smooth out. What I didn't know was that April had started noticing things. She told me later, long after it was all over, that it started with a phone call she overheard in the fall of 2018. She'd come home early from school, bad headache, and Connie didn't hear her come in. April went to her room, and through the wall she could hear her mother on the phone. Not the words at first, just the tone. Connie laughed in a way that April said she'd never heard before. Light. Almost girlish. Like a person being performed. April stood in the hallway and listened. She heard a name, not a name she recognized. A man's name. She didn't say anything to me. She was 16. She didn't know what to do with what she'd heard. So she started paying attention. I want to be precise here because I think precision matters when you're talking about your own blindness. I did not notice that Connie had a second email account until April showed it to me 3 years later. I did not notice that 3 separate savings accounts had been quietly drained, 2 that I knew about and 1 I didn't know existed, over the course of about 14 months. I did not notice that 2 credit cards had been opened in my name without my knowledge, and that by the time I found out, each one carried a balance of over $18,000. I did not notice that the man April had heard on the phone had, at some point, become a consistent presence in Connie's daily life. Lunch, afternoons, occasional weekends when she told me she was visiting a cousin in Tempe. How does a man miss all of that? I've thought about this for a long time. Here's what I think. I was living in a version of my marriage that I had built in my head, and I kept maintaining that version even as the actual thing deteriorated around it. I was working 70 hours a week. I was tired. I believed what I wanted to believe because the alternative was a grief I didn't have the bandwidth to hold. And Connie was careful. She was very careful. April was more careful. I need to tell you what my daughter actually did because it still amazes me. She didn't confront her mother. She didn't come to me. She was 16 years old, and she made a decision that most adults wouldn't have had the patience or the discipline to make. She decided to document. She started with her phone. Simple stuff at first. Screenshots of text she spotted when Connie left her phone on the kitchen counter. Partial conversations. Enough to understand the shape of things without seeing everything clearly. Then she got more systematic. She asked me around Christmas of 2018 if she could have a small Bluetooth speaker for her room. I bought her one. What I didn't know was that she'd also, with her own saved money, purchased a separate voice-activated recorder that she kept in a drawer in the hallway, the spot where Connie usually stood when she talked on the phone. She recorded for 3 years, not constantly, not every conversation. She was smart about it. She captured what she needed. She kept everything organized on an external hard drive she kept locked in her car once she started driving. She told me later that there were nights when she cried doing this. Nights when she thought about just deleting everything and pretending she didn't know. She said the hardest part wasn't the recording, it was watching me come home tired and eat dinner and ask how Connie's day was and believe whatever answer I got. She said she used to watch my face during those dinners and think, he deserves better than this. And then she'd go back to her room and continue. I don't have the words for what that kind of loyalty costs a person. I really don't. Connie filed in March of 2021. April was 19 by then, home from her first year at the University of Arizona because of the pandemic. I came home on a Tuesday afternoon and found the papers on the kitchen table. Connie had already moved some of her things to the guest room. She was very calm about it. She said we'd grown apart. She said she needed something different. She said she hoped we could do this respectfully. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after she went upstairs. April came in around 6. She took one look at me and sat down across from me and said, "Dad, I need to show you something." That was the night I found out. She brought out the hard drive. She had a whole binder, printed documents, screenshots organized by date, account statements she'd somehow gotten hold of, a log she'd kept in a notebook going back almost 3 years. She walked me through it like she was presenting a case, because she was. She'd been building it for 3 years, the accounts first. Connie had been systematically moving money out of our joint savings since early 2019. Small amounts at first, irregular enough to not trigger alerts, then larger transfers as she got more confident. Total across all accounts, somewhere north of $260,000. Some of it had gone into an account in Connie's name only. Some of it had apparently been used to furnish an apartment in Chandler that April had found listed under a name I didn't recognize, later identified as belonging to the man Connie had been seeing. The credit cards, opened using my social security number. Connie had managed our finances entirely since 2007. I trusted her completely, handed that over without a second thought, the way a lot of couples do. The way the comment section of 100 divorce videos will tell you is perfectly normal and perfectly dangerous. The balances were substantial. She'd clearly planned for the accounts to look like joint debt in the settlement. And then the recordings. April didn't make me listen to all of them that night. She played me 3. That was enough. The first was Connie on the phone telling someone, him, that the timing of the divorce filing was perfect because my business had just had its best quarter and she wanted to file while the valuation was at its peak. She used the word valuation. She'd been planning this. The second was a conversation in which Connie discussed in detail how she intended to represent certain assets as belonging to her from before the marriage, assets that I had helped build, things she was going to lie about directly to a judge. The third one, I'm not going to describe in detail. It's enough to say it confirmed everything April had suspected from that hallway in 2018. I didn't cry that night. I thought I would. Instead, I felt something settle in me, a horrible kind of clarity. Like the moment your eyes adjust to a dark room and you finally see what's actually in it. I hired a family law attorney in Phoenix named Beaumont, one of the best in the state, and expensive enough that I felt it every month. April came with me to the first consultation and sat in that office and presented everything she'd compiled with more composure than I had. My attorney looked at her for a long moment and said, "Young lady, you may have just changed the entire outcome of this case. We spent the next several months preparing. The recorder Arizona uses is a one-party consent state, meaning that a recording is legal as long as one person in the conversation has consented to it. April had done her research on that too. Every recording she'd made was legally obtained. Beaumont subpoenaed financial records. The forensic accountant he brought in traced the transfers. The picture that emerged was not a woman who had grown apart from her husband. It was a woman who had spent roughly 18 months methodically preparing to take as much as she possibly could and leave. Connie's attorney came to us twice with settlement offers. Both times I declined on Beaumont's advice. He kept telling me, let it go to the hearing. Trust the process. I trusted the process. The final hearing was set for a Thursday in November. I remember the drive to the courthouse. April picked me up. She was quiet the whole way, both hands on the wheel, and I could see the tension in her jaw. I reached over and put my hand on her arm for a second. She exhaled. "You okay?" I asked. "I've been waiting 3 years for today," she said. "I'm fine." Connie was already there when we walked in. She was sitting with her attorney, and she looked composed and polished the way she always did in public. She glanced at me and then at April, and something moved across her face, too fast to name. Not guilt exactly. Calculation. She didn't know what April had. She knew April and I were close. She'd assumed, I think, that April had chosen me in the way children sometimes choose a parent, emotionally. She had no idea how literally my daughter had chosen me. The first part of the hearing went as expected. Connie's attorney presented their narrative, a devoted wife who had subordinated her own career to support the family, who was entitled to a substantial share of the marital assets. It was polished, it was compelling, it was almost entirely false. Then Beaumont asked the judge for permission to present new evidence. Connie's attorney objected. The judge asked what the nature of the evidence was. Beaumont explained, financial documentation and audio recordings obtained legally under Arizona law, bearing directly on the truthfulness of representations being made to the court. The judge allowed it. April was called forward. She brought the recorder. She sat down and I watched her smooth her jacket and look directly at the judge and state her name clearly and without trembling. Connie's attorney tried to block the recordings. The judge overruled him. April pressed play. I was watching Connie when the first recording started. I saw it happen in real time, the moment she recognized her own voice coming out of that small speaker. Her face did something I had never seen it do in 34 years of knowing her. It collapsed inward, just for a second. Then she looked at her attorney and I could see her say something quietly, urgently. Her attorney put his hand on her arm. The second recording played, and then Connie stood up. She didn't run exactly. It wasn't like the movies. She pushed back her chair and she said something I couldn't make out, and she took 2 or 3 steps toward the door. The bailiff was up in about 2 seconds. The judge's voice, sharp, immediate, said her name. She stopped. She was asked to sit back down. She sat. The judge was not pleased. That's the most restrained way I can put it. What followed was not a divorce hearing in any traditional sense. It became something closer to an unraveling. Beaumont walked the judge through the forensic accountant's findings, the transfers, the hidden account, the credit card debt engineered in my name, the apartment, the timeline of the planning visible in the recordings and the financial records taken together. Connie's attorney asked for a recess. It was granted. When they came back, he looked like a man who had just been told something he didn't want to hear, because he had been. By the end of the day, the judge had ruled on the asset division. I retained the house, the business, and the majority of our legitimate joint savings. The hidden account was ordered returned. The credit card debt was assigned to Connie. The settlement Connie's attorney had presented was set aside entirely. That was the civil side. The criminal referral came 3 weeks later. The DA's office looked at the financial forensics, the fraudulent accounts, the identity used to open credit cards, and decided there was enough to pursue charges. Connie was arrested in early December. She pleaded guilty to financial fraud and identity theft. The sentencing was in April, my daughter's birthday month, which April pointed out to me afterward with an expression I couldn't quite read. Connie received 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2, along with a restitution order covering the full amount she'd moved, plus penalties and legal fees. The man she'd been seeing did not go to prison, but his wife found out. I heard through someone mutual that he'd moved out of that apartment in Chandler not long after everything came to light. I don't know what happened to him after that, and I don't particularly need to. Here's the part I think about most. After the hearing, after the ruling, April and I sat in my truck in the parking garage for a while, and neither of us said anything. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something enormous, not uncomfortable, just large, like standing next to a canyon. Eventually, I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner. She'd had recordings by 2019. That was 2 years before Connie filed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you were happy, or you looked happy." And I kept thinking, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was seeing something that wasn't there. And I didn't want to be the reason your marriage ended if I was wrong. I sat with that for a long time. She wasn't wrong. She was never wrong. She just loved me enough to be certain before she acted. I'm 63 years old, and my daughter spent 3 years of her adolescence quietly protecting me from a betrayal I couldn't see. She sat across dinner tables from me and carried that weight and still managed to finish high school with honors and get into a good university and keep it together well enough that I never suspected a thing. I've talked to other men my age who've been through divorces. The financial part is devastating in ways that are hard to explain to people who haven't been through it. When you've spent decades building something and you watch it start to be dismantled, especially when it's being dismantled deliberately by someone you trusted completely, it does something to your sense of reality. You start questioning your own memory, your own judgment. What April gave me was not just evidence. It was the truth, the actual truth, documented and undeniable. And there's something that happens when you finally have that, when the version of events you've been living inside gets replaced by the version that actually happened. It hurts. Of course it hurts. But it also frees you from something, from the fog of not knowing, from that specific exhaustion of trying to reconcile what you felt with what you were being told to believe. I know what happened now. I know exactly what happened, and I know who my daughter is. The restitution has been paid in full. I've met with a financial advisor, someone April actually researched and recommended, and the business is in better shape than it's ever been. I have a different relationship with my own finances now. I review everything myself. Every account, every statement, every month. Not because I'm paranoid, because I understand now that paying attention is not distrust, it's just sense. April graduated last spring. She's thinking about law school. I told her she'd be remarkable. She told me I was biased. I told her that was irrelevant. I don't talk about Connie much. It's not bitterness exactly. More like she's become a fact about my life rather than a presence in it. Something that happened. Something I survived. What I talk about when I talk about this at all is April. How she sat across from a judge she'd never met and pressed play on something she'd been carrying for 3 years. How she didn't flinch. How she'd made a decision at 16, in a hallway, listening through a wall, and she'd committed to it with a patience and a precision that I still can't entirely comprehend. My attorney told me at the end of it all that in 30 years of family law he'd seen a lot of cases. He'd seen hidden assets, fraudulent accounts, manufactured debt. But he'd never seen a case where the evidence had been assembled like that, over that length of time, with that level of organization, by someone that young. I told him April had always been thorough. He laughed and said she should consider a career in litigation. I told him she already was. Some people, when they hear this story, focus on Connie, on what she did, on what she deserved, on whether 4 years was enough. I understand that. Betrayal on that scale earns its anger. But that's not what I carry with me. What I carry is this. A Tuesday night in 2021, my daughter sitting across from me at a kitchen table with a hard drive and a binder, saying, "Dad, I need to show you something." The steadiness in her voice, the 3 years behind it. The choice she'd made, quietly, alone, without asking for credit, to stand on the side of truth even when the easiest thing would have been to look away. I've been a lot of things in my life. A son, a husband, a business owner, a man who worked more than he should have and missed more than he knew. I've made my share of mistakes and I'll make more, but I am April's father, and today, that's the one I'm most grateful to be. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way, just in the plain, practical way you think about things when you're 63 and you watched your own life nearly come apart and then, somehow, hold together. Here's what I keep coming back to. Everything that happened was a chain. Connie made choices, one after another, small ones at first and then larger ones, and each one made the next easier to make. That's how it works. You move a little money, nothing happens. You move more, still nothing. You open a card, you tell a story to cover it, and at some point you've drifted so far from who you started out being that you can't even see the shore anymore. I don't think Connie woke up one morning and decided to become someone who would steal from her husband and lie to a judge. I think she made 100 smaller decisions that added up to exactly that person. That's the part that scares me most, honestly. Not the betrayal itself, the gradual nature of it. And then there's April. April made choices too, starting at 16 in a hallway, listening through a wall. She chose not to look away. She chose to be certain before she acted. She chose patience over comfort and truth over peace for 3 years, at an age when most kids are worried about prom and summer plans. That didn't come from nowhere. That came from a character she'd been building her whole life, quietly, in the way that character always gets built, through small decisions that nobody sees. I think about what it cost her to sit at dinner tables across from me for 3 years carrying what she knew, to watch me believe things that weren't true, and say nothing, not because she didn't care, but because she cared enough to be right before she spoke. That kind of discipline doesn't come from talent. It comes from something deeper, a commitment to doing the hard thing correctly instead of the easy thing quickly. That's intelligence in the truest sense I know. Not test scores, not credentials. The ability to think clearly under pressure and act on what you know is right, even when it would be so much easier not to. What I want to say, and I mean this as plainly as I know how, is that the outcome of this story was not luck. Connie did not lose because the universe decided to balance the scales. She lost because her choices left evidence, and because my daughter had the moral clarity to collect it and the nerve to present it. Those are human qualities. Earned qualities. And they mattered more than anything else in that courtroom. I spent a long time being angry at myself for not seeing what was happening, for trusting too completely, for being absent in the ways I was absent, for handing over control of things I should have paid attention to. That anger is fair, I think, but I've tried not to let it become the whole story, because the whole story includes April. And April is the part I'm most proud of, not because she saved me, though she did, but because she showed me what it looks like when a person commits fully to what they believe is right and doesn't waver from it. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from all of this, it's just that. Pay attention to your finances. Yes, review your accounts, know your numbers. Don't hand that completely to someone else, no matter how much you trust them. But also pay attention to the people around you, to what they're becoming, to what you're becoming, to what you're becoming. Because we are all, every day, building ourselves through our choices, and one day in some courtroom or hospital or kitchen or parking garage, those choices will be the whole record of who we were. April pressed play, and everything true came out. That's all it ever takes in the end. Someone willing to press play.